Imagine a world where those in power are not motivated by wealth, ambition, or fame. A world where rulers are guided solely by wisdom, virtue, and a deep understanding of what is truly good for society. Imagine leaders who dedicate themselves and their lives not to their own benefit, but to the well-being of all. This was the vision of Plato's Philosopher King, a ruler who embodies wisdom, reason, and justice. By the end of this episode, you will understand why this ancient concept still matters today, why it could transform society if realised, and also why it contains risks we cannot ignore. So let's travel back to ancient Athens, 4th century BCE. The city-state is bustling, ideas are flourishing, yet democracy is young, fragile and chaotic. Plato, who is one of the greatest philosophers in history, watches as leaders rise and fall, often driven not by the public good, but by personal ambition, greed, or mere popularity. In his magnus opus, The Republic, Plato imagines a city ruled not by chance or election, but by wisdom. A city governed by a ruler who has seen truth, who has turned from the shadows of ignorance into the light of knowledge, the Philosopher King. But what does this mean in practical terms? How does a ruler become a Philosopher King? And what does this ideal teach us about leadership today? Plato believed that most people are guided by desires, fears, and ignorance. They seek wealth, power, or comfort, often at the expense of the greater good. But he argued that some rare individuals pursue wisdom above all else. These individuals are suited to rule, not because of birth or popularity, but because they understand the true nature of justice, goodness, and virtue. They are Philosopher Kings. Think of Plato's famous analogy of the cave. Most of human lives live in the shadows, seeing only reflections of reality, opinions, illusions, and appearances. But the philosopher ascends, leaves the cave, and sees the world as it truly is, the light of truth. Only such a person is fit to guide society because they can see beyond the distractions, the desires that normally mislead ordinary people. Plato even outlined a rigorous educational path for these rulers. Imagine it, decades of learning, beginning with music and gymnastics to harmonise body and soul, then mathematics and geometry to sharpen abstract thinking, and finally the dialectic, the art of questioning, reasoning, and uncovering ultimate truths. Leadership, Plato argued, is not about ambition, it is the responsibility of the wise. So let's try a thought experiment. Imagine if today political leaders were required to undergo decades of philosophical training. Before anyone could run for office, they would study ethics, history, economics, logic, and human psychology. Only those who demonstrated true wisdom and virtue would be allowed to govern. How would society look? Would corruption vanish? Would decisions focus on long-term well-being rather than short-term gain? And yet Plato's vision wasn't naive. He recognised that this was extraordinarily rare. Not everyone could become a Philosopher King, but even if only a few individuals achieved this, their guidance could reshape society for the better. He famously wrote, "Until philosophers rule as kings, or those who are now called kings and rulers really inadequately philosophize, cities will have no rest from evils." Powerful words. Rest from evils. Plato saw a world in chaos, and he believed that wisdom was the only antidote. And why does this idea matter, even today? Plato observed that democracies often drift and shift into chaos. Leaders are chosen not for wisdom or moral insight, but for charisma, popularity, or financial power. In modern terms, think of politicians elected through sound bites, social media influence, or party loyalty, rather than understanding the long-term impact of their decisions. Plato's Philosopher King serves as a benchmark of excellence, a standard against which all leaders can be measured. So imagine this even in business. This principle still applies. CEOs that are trained in ethics and philosophy, who prioritise long-term societal impact over short-term profit, are rare. But they are profoundly transformative when they do exist. The Philosopher King teaches us that wisdom must guide action. So could artificial intelligence or advisory councils made up of highly trained experts serve as modern Philosopher Kings? Imagine a society where decisions are based not on popularity, but on rigorous analysis, ethical reasoning, and foresight. It's not fantasy. Elements of this already exist. Yet, as we'll explore, the model carries risk. Now let's confront the critics. First, elitism. Plato's system assumes only a select few can rule wisely. Does this create a hierarchy of worth? What if rulers believe they know what's best, but are wrong? And second is practicality. The Philosopher King requires near perfect moral character. However, history has showed, and it's littered with, wise men corrupted by power. Absolute authority, even in the hands of the wise, can become dangerous if unchecked. And what about freedom versus guidance? A government led by a Philosopher King could limit personal freedom, or even well-intentioned rulers might enforce their vision of the good life on others, overriding personal choice. Benevolent dictatorship can quickly become tyranny if human judgment fails. Modern dilemmas echo these concerns. Technocrats, elite advisory boards, AI-driven governance all bring wisdom, but who ensures accountability? Who prevents the blind spots, biases, or errors of those in power? And yet, despite these problems, the principle remains crucial. Societies need wisdom at the top. The Philosopher King is aspirational, a reminder of the standard we should strive for, even if perfection is impossible. So what does this mean for us today? How can we apply the concept even if we cannot create literal Philosopher Kings? First, leadership must combine knowledge, ethics, and action. Popularity or wealth alone is insufficient. Second, Plato encouraged us to cultivate philosophical thinking in our own lives by practicing critical thinking, making decisions guided by ethics and reflection, considering the long-term consequences of actions, not just immediate gains. So let's do a small reflective exercise. Imagine yourself in a leadership role. Ask, am I acting from fear, desire, or wisdom? Would my decisions benefit society in the long term? What would a Philosopher King do if they were in charge? Even if you're not a ruler, these questions transform how you influence the world through your career, your relationships, and your daily decisions. To summarise, Plato's Philosopher King is more than a political concept. It's a timeless archetype for wise, ethical leadership. It reminds us that knowledge without virtue is dangerous, and that power without wisdom is a threat to society. Yet the idea is aspirational. Yes, it carries risk, but it also challenges us to raise the standard of leadership, to cultivate wisdom in ourselves, and to demand it from those who lead. Even if no perfect Philosopher King ever exists, striving towards this ideal shapes better societies, better leaders, and better individuals. So the next time you question your leaders or yourself, ask, are decisions being made from ambition, fear, or wisdom? And if not, how might we approach the Philosopher King standard in our own lives?